Hi everybody, welcome to the Witching Week. Today is episode 12. I am your host, my name is Wren, and as Samhain is only a few days away, I thought we'd do something a bit different and we'd share some spooky stories. Now the first story actually comes from me. This is my personal experience and it starts 21 years ago. I was walking down a dark, unlit country lane in Hampshire with my friend Sarah. It was the night before I was due to move to Northern Ireland and we were grabbing some precious time together. Down the other end of the lane was a man with a dog. I remember being in a fantastic mood. I was enjoying my evening with Sarah and I was full of joy and excitement for the coming days. At the prospect of petting a dog into the mix, and I was positively bursting with happiness, my telephone rang and it was Tom, my then partner. He was on the overnight ferry from Belfast, making his way over to England to collect me. I was chatting to Tom, hearing his news about how the first phase of our relocation had gone, and I was telling him what I was up to. We'd been on the call for a few minutes when I said I was going to say goodnight to allow him to attempt some sleep, because the ferry was a late night one, and so that I could pet this dog that was coming up. Sarah quietly shushed me, shh, and I broke my sentence off. Weird. I repeated the bit about the dog to Tom and she shushed me again, looking a bit sheepish. I got off the phone and I asked her what was wrong and she said she didn't want to talk about it. It seemed really weird and out of character for Sarah, but I didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable. We carried on walking down the dark, unlit passage, chatting and enjoying our time together. We got to the end of the road and I mentioned how strange it was that the man or the dog never materialised. She told me she'd answer this when we were back on lit paths. We made our way back onto the estate and she told me that the lane was called Black Dog Lane and it was supposedly haunted by a man with a big dark dog. The man would wait for the dog at the end of the lane before they disappeared together. Now the next story is another animal related story and it's about a family pet that came back for one more visit. My son Archie sat on my mother-in-law's stairs talking to nobody. When I asked him who he was talking to, he said a white rabbit, but it's gone now. Once upon a time, my in-laws had had a pet indoor rabbit whose hutch was at the bottom of the stairs. He passed away the same year that Archie was born. Archie was only 3 at the time when he told us this. It gave us shivers. The next story is one from Brazil. It's about a taxi driver in Sao Paulo. My uncle told me this story that he heard from a taxi driver. Something very spooky happened to him in Sao Paulo in the 1960s. One November night, this taxi driver was heading back home after his very last ride. It was really late, it was well past midnight, when all of a sudden he saw a young lady dressed in a long gown signing to him. He stopped and she asked for his services. He was really tired and a long way from home, but he couldn't leave a young lady on the dangerous roads. So he took her to the address that she requested. He said she was really happy and chatting and she had a beautiful sweet perfume. He dropped her at the address she requested and he went home for some rest. When he got home, he noticed that there was a floral scarf in the back seat of his car. It was too late and he was too far from home, so he decided that he would drive to the address the next morning and drop off her scarf, which he duly did. The next morning he knocked on the door and an old lady answered. He gave her the scarf and told her about the pretty lady. And the woman said, well, there's no one else living here except for me and my cat. I'm widowed. After the taxi driver gave a description of the lady to the woman, she burst into tears and said that it sounded like her only daughter, who died at a very young age on the same day of November, the night that the girl took the taxi home. The old lady smelled the scarf and said that it smelled of her daughter. The next story is about a vicar's wife. Being a Wiccan family, I'd never really spoken to my girls much about the Bible and Jesus, so imagine my surprise when I heard Becky chatting away in her room one night. I went in to ask her what she was doing, and her reply was, I'm talking with the lady about Jesus. I asked her what she meant, and she went on to explain that there was a lady that would visit her in her room at night and talk to her about God, Jesus, and the Bible. If that wasn't spooky enough, a few years later my husband and I remortgaged our home, and when we got all our documents back, amongst them was a death certificate from the previous owners and they had been a reverend and his wife. Sadly, the wife Evelyn died during their time here, and her husband had claimed on the insurance to pay the mortgage off. Evelyn is still watching over the girls to this day. We hear her wandering the hallway at night. At least now she has a better understanding of witchcraft too. For a while, whenever I worked on my Wiccan stuff, she would yank my pentacle necklace off me and send it flying. Thankfully, she doesn't do that anymore, but she still checks on the girls whilst they are sleeping. The next story is one submitted to me by my friend Charlie. He and I both share a love of Avebury, and this story is about Avebury and its secrets. I remember being at Avebury coming down from West Kennet Long Barrow and seeing what looked like 3 or 4 burning torches coming towards the barrow from the hill as if they were walking towards the barrow. We headed down expecting to meet some people, probably pagans, with fire torches, but there was no one other than a dog walker right near the Avebury Road. Either they'd put their torches out and vanished, headed to Silbury Hill perhaps, or it was an echo of the past. The next story comes from Wales, and it's so lovely that these stories are coming from all across the world. This is told by my Australian friend who's been living in Wales for the past few years, and again it's about another lady ghost who watches over children. We had a night in our first house in Wales where none of the kids would go to sleep. I have 4 children. My husband and I both felt, and I saw, someone on the stairs. She wore Victorian clothing. She went upstairs and in 2 minutes all of the kids were asleep. She helped to put them to bed often. If I got angry in that house at the kids, I could feel seething disapproval from someone in the corner of my bedroom. When I stopped yelling so much, the feeling went away completely. It seems our visitor was a lover of children. The next story is from America. This is from another good friend of mine, and it's about someone she saw on her way home one evening. Recently, I was driving down a road and a man walked into the road. It was dusk, but not dark enough to see details. But this man was definitely pitch black. He looked in my direction, I think, and then he bolted across the road into the trees and the brush on the other side. When I got to where he disappeared, I realised there was no way he could have just melted through the thick bushes and undergrowth like he did. I should say that this area has a long history in the rural farming community. I get a very strong feeling about who he was. And now we have another story, another one about somebody watching over children. There seems to be a really popular theme with these stories, and actually I think most of them are fairly comforting rather than scary. Let's see what you think about this one. I have one that gives me chills to this day. When my mother was pregnant with me, my parents started looking for a bigger house, as I would be their 4th child. They found a house for cheap rent in exchange for doing all the house and yard maintenance. A good deal, as my dad was very handy. The landlady was a widow who had recently lost her child, a 16-year-old daughter, so she moved from the larger house to a smaller house she had on the same property. We lived in a small town, a port where ships often docked and sailors had their fun with women in town, and unfortunately, a naive 16-year-old girl ended up pregnant and unwed. The girl was scared and worried about her future, also snubbed in our small town where people could be very judgmental in the early 1970s. She had her mother's love and support, but one night, at about 6 months pregnant, she drowned herself in the lake behind the hospital, the same hospital I was born in. In the house, there was a small bedroom off the master bedroom that had been decorated as a sweet nursery for the pregnant girl's baby. It was painted yellow, and my parents thought it was adorable and handy. From the day my mother came home from the hospital with me, she felt a presence in that little room, hovering over my crib. She knew it was the poor 16-year-old pregnant girl who committed suicide. She told me that she just knew, and as a baby I would lay in my crib and smile and coo at nothing that anyone could see. Eventually it got too intense for my mum. Her nerves started to get the better of her, and she refused to go upstairs after dark. My dad worked a steady 4 to midnight shift, and only when he got home would she put me in my crib and go to bed. The presence grew so strong that my parents actually borrowed an additional crib from relatives to keep downstairs, as my mother felt so uneasy in my little yellow room. But soon my mother felt the same presence at my downstairs crib too. We were a family of Italian Roman Catholics, and even the priest came to bless the house. It didn't help, and although the spirit of that young girl never caused any harm to me, her constant presence really upset my mother, but they couldn't afford to move until I was about 3 years old. My mother had a fear that the spirit might come with us, but she never did. And because it was such a small, gossipy town, everyone else that lived in that house thereafter swore that they could feel the presence too. Thanks so much for sharing that story. That's a really, really creepy story. So next we are going on to somebody who stayed in a hotel. I may have told you this story before. Once when staying in a hotel that had been a poor work farm in its history, I dreamt a woman was standing at the foot of my bed. It woke me up, heart pounding, and I pulled my feet up close. I asked the hotel staff about ghosts, and they pointed to me a little book in their gift shop that was about hauntings at their various hotels. There was a story for our hotel about a woman who used to wake up residents who slept too late by going in and grabbing and shaking their feet. The next story is about the comforting presence of a grandfather. I'm certain that in the past my grandfather has sat with me long after his death. He's been gone 40 years next year. He smoked 60 senior service cigarettes a day. For you youngsters, they were in untipped strong tobacco. And he had a very distinctive smell. As you can guess, it was a smell I associated with him. In 2 different cars I've smelt the aroma of senior service as clear as day, just for 20 or 30 seconds, and then it would go. I would never mistake that smell, and I would never let anyone smoke in my car. No one ever has. My only explanation is that just for a brief second, he was letting me know that he was with me. That's such a beautiful and comforting story. Thank you to everybody who has sent in stories. They've been really, really brilliant, and I look forward to doing this again next year and sharing them all with you. I think it's time for some cards now. So yeah, let's get to it. Okay, so I think this reading is all about having the right attitude. So we've got the Ace of Wands, we have got the 8 of Cups, we have got the Moon, we've got the 4 of Cups, and the 7 of Pentacles. And this reading screams out to me that this is all about attitudes and perspective. So going into the week ahead, you may well be given some opportunities, like literally out of the blue. But where attitude comes in with this is it's down to you to take something that you are given, to be grateful, to be thankful for that, but it's up to you to turn that into something sustainable. Now, for you to do that, you are going to need to have the following attitude. You're going to have to be prepared to walk away when something isn't working. That takes a lot of courage. And this card is also usually a reminder to keep an eye on your mental health as well. It can be an indication of mental health struggles. So if something is not working for you, if something is affecting your mental health, then no matter how much you might want it, it might be time to turn it down or to walk away. And, you know, also, sometimes we can't see things for what they are. Sometimes things are an illusion. And the moon is certainly a reminder that not everything is always as it seems. So I think there's a bit of a warning here going into the week ahead that, you know, you might well be given something, an opportunity or, you know, some sort of benefit or something out of the blue, but just be ever so slightly wary. Be prepared to walk away from something if it doesn't feel right. That said, don't be stubborn. You know, don't refuse help when it's offered. Don't be pig-headed. This card to me is all about that pig-headed attitude when we're like, no, I can do it myself. I don't need any help. I'm like that. Everybody's a bit like that. And the overall message, the last card, is that, you know, if you put the hard work in, you will reap the rewards. You'll reap what you sow. So yeah, not a bad message for the week. A few cautions there, but I think it's about just adopting the right attitude and the right frame of mind. Not a bad message at all as we head into the winter. I hope you all have a really, really beautiful and blessed Samhain. It's just a few days away now. I hope you have a beautiful time honouring and venerating your ancestors. We're going to have a seasonal feast as per usual, and we will set an extra place at the table for any of our ancestors and spirits passing through. So from my heart to yours, to you and your family, I'm wishing you a really, really beautiful Samhain, and I'll be back next week with the usual format.